Today we will see how we can create and configure the services and work with them. So technically, what is a service? Yesterday I explained. So it's a predefined business logic. It's a set of functions. So we can inject the services and use the services from any location. So how we can configure a service? We will see that. Generally, service uses two important options. So one is injector and another one is provider. So what is injector? What is provided? What is provider? How it works? We will see that. How we can work with them. So technically, when you are working with the service, actually service is a class, and service class comprises of service methods. So these methods return a functionality. So now we need to load the service and configure the service. Actually, so technically, when we configure a service loads into memory. So we have to access the service from the memory and use it. So it is loaded into memory and handle it, right? I am audible, right? Is it clear? My voice is clear. Yeah, so fine. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, let's continue. Yes. Fine. So technically, service loads into memory. And this loaded service into memory is located by provider. Actually, provider locates the service into memory. Provider locates the service in the memory. That means it is responsible for finding the service in the memory. Actually, it will be application level or module level memory. So in application memory, we call it as root, and it in a module level we call it as child. We have two important options. So module level and application level. So technically you have to define where it is present. So now we will see. So how this is located, and after locating it is injected into component. So we need an injector. That means we need injectable. This injectable is using an injector, and that injector injects that into component. Injectable injects into component. So provider will locate it, and injector is going to inject that. So technically, how the service is created, how the service is configured, we will see that. We have two techniques, same. You can create by using the methods manual approach, or we can generate by using command. By using command ng generate service, and the service name you can give, service name you can define. Let's create the service and configure the service. So, and how we can use the service in our application. So I will go to the project. So technically, let's go here, go to the project, and here we will maintain a separate folder. So first basic option I will show you here. In the components, so I have a component called login. Suppose I have a login component. So in the login component, I need to design a simple random code to be generated. So random code need to be generated. So how we can handle that? How we can configure the random code that can be generated into this? So I will keep this login component in the startup first, so that we can see what login component is having. So I will keep that login component in the startup, and index.html login. Okay. So the login is in the startup. So this is the login in the startup. Okay, this is the login in the startup. And now in this login, I want to go to the login HTML. Here I will add another data definition, data term. So verify code, and the data definition. Here I need to define the code. So verify code, and I will add a button here. So the class as btn, and here we will use a span, and the class bi, and bi async we have. So we have synchronous refresh or something like this. Let's check in the bootstrap icons, actually. Bootstrap icons, yeah. In the bootstrap icons, we will check the icon, synchronous icon is there or not. That means sync icon is there or not. Refresh, yeah. We have this arrow repeat. We will use that arrow repeat. That is just like a refresh option available, arrow repeat. Okay. So we will use that there, right? So yeah, arrow repeat is the option. So I will use that here. Bi arrow repeat. Okay. So that is just a button is defined there. Verify code button is there. I want to generate a random code, and I want that everywhere, not only in login form, in register, in login, wherever I'm giving a form, and the user have to enter. So I want to provide that. I need to provide it. So technically, so let's see how we can create a service. So just like a capture. So let's see how we can do that. I will go to the services related option. Let's go into the app folder first. So in the app folder, we will maintain a separate folder for services. Services, a separate folder, just like pipes and components. Add a new file. So here, capture.service.ts. So that is the name given for that. So capture.service.ts. Usually service is given with service extension. So service extension we define. So technically now how to configure the service. Actually, as I told you, so we need an injector and we need an provider. We need to configure the injector and provider. So technically, so how the injector and provider will work. So first import, we have to import from Angular core library. We have to import injectable. So we need to import injectable. So injectable, we have to import this injectable. From the Angular core library, we have to import this injectable. And now technically, so it uses, it is a class, export class. Here we have capture service. Capture service is just a class. It's a capture service, is a class. But you need to configure as a service class. Then it should use a decorator injectable. Injectable tells so where to inject. We have to use a provider. Provided in which level? So we can provide it in root level. Provided in root level. So this indicates that it is injected into application level. It is injected into application level. So at application level, we have injected this. There is another technique also. If you don't provide that at the application level, means provided in here, you can write that provided in, you can write that provider related information in app module. In app module, you will have providers. So here you can load all the services. Which service you want to use, you can provide that service here. What is difference is, if you define here, all the services are loaded at the time of application startup. But generally, that is not great every time. We need service only when it is requested by any component. So then in that case, if we want it is to request at any location, then what we have to do is, that means we have to configure that inside this injectable. I will show you the technique. Without this, also we can configure it. So, but where to configure, how to define, it's mandatory. Provider is mandatory. You write inside the service or you write in app module. It depends on your situation. If you have several services and you want all the services to get ready and to start with application, then you can write them here. No, you want to load and use them only when it is required, then you can write here. I will show you this. Now the service is ready. Now what a service contains? Usually service contains a service method. So we can write a service can contain multiple methods also. So we will write a method. So how we can configure the method? So we will write a method called generate code. We will write generate code. So that is the option. So technically, generate code is a method which should return some functionality. You can have multiple methods. We can have multiple methods. This is one method. And in this method, so we will create let. So suppose I defined some a, and a is equal to some how to generate a random number. I hope you people know to generate random number in JavaScript, what function we have to use. So which function is used for generate random code? So yeah, so we have an option math.random. Very good. So we can use a JavaScript math object which have random. But math.random actually return a value 0.76 or so. So 0.76. So that is the reason. So what we have to do, we have to convert into an integer value. So how we can convert into an integer value? So then we will multiply by 10, that is fine. So similarly, that means we will multiply by 10, then it will get 1, 2, 3 like that. Okay. So that means, so technically, now we have other options. Let b is equal to math.random. So we have a math.random and into 10. Okay, let's keep like this some options. So here, let's copy that and paste it. So C, D, E, F like that. So we have C, we have D, E, F. Okay. So these are 6 numbers, random numbers are generating. Then we will create a code, let code. And this code contains a string that combines all these numbers. But what we have to do is, we need to use math.round. It will round a. So why? Because sometimes it may return 1.58, 1.60 like that. We need just to round to the nearest and display that. So then we have to use that math.round. So now what we have to do, the same we have to apply for others also. So then I will copy this and I will define this. So math.round b, just a space separated C, and math.round D and E and F. Okay. So it is a 6 digit random number. Some want this to return. We need that to return. Then generally just we can define return code. So that is the result of this generate code method. So generate code is a service. So, and this generate code service is generate code is a service method, and this service method is going to generate. It is application starts. So service will be loaded only when it is requested by any component now. So for root level, it is available and it is provided only when it is loaded. Now, technically, so we have to import this and inject this into any component and use it. So let's see. When we have to import this and inject this into any component. So here we have the login component ready. Yeah, here we want to use it. Let's go to the login component TS. Now, if I want to inject that, so we need to inject that into the component at the time of component created. So that means we have to configure a constructor here, constructor. So when memory is allocated, remember, generally, if I want to access a service and use that service, usually what we can do is we can import the service class. So import, so the service class. What is the service? We have to import the capture service class. So, and in order to access the methods in that class, you know, general technique. You have to create an object. We have to create an object, and we have to access through that object reference. But I told you that it uses a singleton mechanism. In singleton mechanism, what we have to do is in singleton mechanism, we need to initialize this into the memory of component when the component is created. The first component object is created. So when the first component object is created, it should be loaded into the memory. So, and it should be available across all requests after that. Every time I don't want to configure, every time I don't want to create it. So that means we should not use like capture service object. So we need to inject this into the constructor. So what we do is into the constructor, we will write like some capture. It is a parameter. This parameter is of type capture service. It is of type capture service. So it is of type capture service. So in this capture service, so the method, anything you defined as a parameter inside the constructor, it is not accessible outside that constructor. So it is not accessible outside this method. Capture is not accessible outside. So in that case, what we have to do is we have to configure this with an access modifier like public. Now it is accessible outside, but public is accessible everywhere. We want to make it accessible only to this current component, then make it as private. So this is mandatory. Otherwise, you cannot access this outside the constructor. And in the constructor, it is loaded. It is not accessible outside the constructor. So we have to configure. So technically, we can configure this in another method also. That is, as an object, you can create it and access it, but it is not recommended. It will be a factory method. In interviews, they ask, what is factory method? I told you yesterday. Factory method means every time it is created. Every time it is created. But we want a service as a singleton. So singleton. In that case, we have to define that. We have to define that in the constructor at the time of loading. Then after that, what we do is, through this captcha reference, we can access this methods present inside it. So captcha is a captcha type. It is a user defined type, and we will write a method. So we will define a method. First, we will create a property and configure the property. That means, so we will create a property code. Code is generally any type. We are expecting any type, and we have to access that and use it. That means this dot code is equal to this dot captcha. So this dot captcha dot generate code. Generate code is a service method which is returning the code. It is returning the code. So technically now this is ready. It is injected and it is defined. Now you are injecting a service. We are accessing the service method, and whatever the content is available, so we can content is available, we can inject into that component, and we can assign into this local reference code. Now this code we have to use it. Then what we have to do now, go to this HTML, and I will display that code here. So we will use a binding expression. I will access that code and display here. So access the code here, and you can see here the code is displayed there. A code is displayed there, but I want that code to change when you click this button. That means, so on button click, we will write a function. So on button click, we will write a function. So how we can define a function? So we will write a function here. So the function is on refresh click. On refresh click, what should happen? This dot code should generate again the code. This dot captcha dot generate code. It should generate the code again. And on refresh click is a method. It should fire up when user clicks this button. That means on this button click, we need to access on refresh click method. We need to access that. And you can see, so a random code is generated. I click the refresh button. Every time a random code will be generated. Every time a random code is generated. You can see a random code is generated here. So this is a simple technique of service. So generally, we have to configure a service, and we need to use the service. So, and we can inject that from any location and use it. Now see the point. What I will do here, in the provider of service, I am not mentioning about the provider. I am just using this injectable. It indicates that actually this indicates that this is injectable. This is injectable. Service is injectable. Okay, service is injectable, but it cannot be located. Provider needs to locate this service. It is injectable. Now you can see it's not working for us. Let's go to the inspect, and in the console, you will observe here in the console. So we will see in the console, we will see here there is saying that no provider for capture service. So we haven't mentioned the provider. Okay, you can do one thing. You can mention the provider, not here. You can go to module. In the module, we have providers. App module.ts, we have providers. In the providers, we can inject that service. The service is capture service. Make sure that that capture service is imported first. That means we have to import the capture service, and we have to define that in the providers. In the providers, you can have multiple services. You can inject them and you can configure them here. Now the capture service is ready. Now this capture service is going to work for you now. You can see it's working. It is working. That means you haven't written the provider for the service here, but the provider is configured at application level, so that all the services are ready, are loaded at the time of application startup. That need some services to keep ready so that they can serve to various components. Sometimes we don't want like that. We want only the service to be loaded when it is required. Then if I remove from here, so then it shows again the problem. So provider not there. Then we will go to the service. Here in the injector, we are defining provided in root, that is the root level. There is another option. Instead of provided in root, you can also use platform. Platform is for workspace. We created a projects. If you want to provide for multiple applications, this service across multiple applications, we need to keep it as platform. It's working. It's no problem. Only the point
Recording in progress.
So we created the data and we accessed the data and used it in the component. And every time, so we have to hard code this data. Suppose I created some data binding related products. When I created these products, you can see a lot of data is there. Now I need this data in several components. But when you declare that in a component, it is accessible only to this component. But I want this to be accessible across the components. So in that case, that means we need to define this as a service and inject that service and use the data coming from the service. It will be very simplified now. Now all your data will be in a service. From there, you can access it and you can use it. So, but in real world scenario, actually what happens, that data comes from a backend API. So we will have a server side API. From the API, the data comes. We need to access and we have to use it. So we need to access and we have to use it. So generally, that is what, so we have to manage. Now we will see that how we can access data and how we can use the data. You can keep data in that service method and you can use it. For example, let's create a service now. So let's add a service. Go to that services folder, open that services folder in terminal, and you can simply write ng generate service data. That is the service name I given, data. So data, okay, skip test. So we are creating a service, ng generate service and the service name. And the service name is data. It will generate a service, okay? And you see, now let's go to the data service. So here, this data, I keep empty array. I will remove this entire collection and I will keep it as empty array. It is an empty array. The data is an empty array. And we don't have the data at all. And now you see here, so in the service, data service, everything is written for you. This data service is having everything written for you. Just what you have to do, you have to create a service method. Service method, I will say get products. This service method should return the data. That's it. Now I want to use this data from the data service in the products component. So in products component, what we have to do, inject the data service first. So that means private data is a reference, data service, we are injecting it. After injecting the data service, so that is the data service injected here. So because data is already having a name, data service, okay, that is the reference. Through this data service, you can access the data and you can assign it. That means on initialization, what should happen? So this is yeah, data service. Yeah, this is the array, empty array we are having. Now into that array, this dot data, it is an array. Into that array, we can access this dot data service dot get products. That's it. And we need to make it as any type array. That will be better. It can access that and it can use it. That means we don't have data here. Data is present in the products component, and in index page, and you can see the app products, it is fine. And the products component is having the data and displaying. It's working. The data is working and it is displaying. But the data is not present in the products component directly. You can see in the products component TS, data is not present here in a service. From the service, we are accessing the data and we are using the data. We are accessing and using the data from the service. So this is a good approach. So every time when we need to handle the data, so we need to use this mechanism. Now, in any component you want this products data, just inject that service and access the method which is returning the data, store in a local repository and use it. In real-time projects, what we do actually is, in real-time projects, generally the approach how it happens is, you will have a database. So that means the data is in the database, Like, so you have Oracle, MySQL, SQL Server, or MongoDB. So in different databases, DB2, so many. Now, to interact with the data in the database and communicate with the data, you use server-side technologies. Like you have JSP, you have PHP, you have like Python, like you have .NET, like you have Node.js. You use this to communicate with the database. And you generally what we do is here. So to communicate with the database, get the data from the database. And you have to return this data in such a way that it can reach any client. It can reach any client. That means an application is running. Client side an application is running. To that application, we need to send data. It can be a Windows, it can be a Mac, so that means operating system. It can be an Linux, or it can be Android or iOS, anywhere the data should come. So the data should go, the data should reach. Then in that case, generally in your server service, you might have learned about web services. So web services and APIs like concept. I hope you people have learned this web services and API concept. Am I right? You have learned the concept of web services and APIs. Huh? So you know how to create a web service and configure a web service in your server side. So because you are a full stack developer, if not, you will learn. So later you will learn how to create the services, how we can create the services. So that means if you haven't learned, yeah, you will learn later because you are into the full stack development process. Currently, you may be learning some basic concepts of full stack and some frameworks. You are learning some frameworks. Later, you will learn about web services. So when you learn about web services and the RESTful services, you heard about them, na? Web services, RESTful services, you heard about them, right? So web services, RESTful services, you heard about that. Those are the topics available in your Java full stack, and all these topics will be there. You will learn. Yeah, you will learn. That means you will learn how to create APIs. What these APIs will do is they will communicate with the database, get the data from the database, and they will return the data. Actually, there are so many techniques. We call this as distributed computing. Distributed computing. Distributed computing is nothing but distributed computing architecture is nothing but it allows two computers, two machines, applications running on two different machines to share information between them. To share information between them. That means client machine, server machine. One application is on server machine, another application is on client machine. So they can share information between them. Distributed computing, or in a single machine, two applications are running into process. Those can share information between them. That you will learn in a concept of web services, RESTful services. You will learn about them, how to create and configure the services. Actually, distributed computing architectures are so many. I will show you a simple glance to you so that later when you learn services, you will understand them detailedly. I will just give you an overview of this so that you can use it now. So actually, so we have computing architectures. We have distributed computing, cluster computing. So we have parallel computing. So we have all these distributed computing architectures. So what we have to do is, so generally, distributed computing means actually distributed computing architecture means a simple point. So distributed computing architecture is nothing but it allows communication between. So distributed computing allows communication between two applications running into different machines in a network to share information. That means information can be shared between two applications running on two different machines, client machine, server machine, or communication between two objects running in two different processes of same machine also. So that is distributed computing. That means two computers, two applications, server application, client application. I told you in the introduction also, if you remembered, I told you that, so suppose in your mobile, you are using a Facebook app. I told you that Facebook app, Amazon app that you are using on your mobile, they are not mobile apps. So they are distributed applications. That means you will have a Facebook server side app, and you have a Facebook client app. This Facebook server side app communicates with the client app and sends the data. It gets the data from the client app and it will receive the data and stores in the data source. So that is distributed computing. There are so many distributed computing technologies actually. We have so many distributed computing technologies. So what are various distributed computing technologies? We have Corba, DCOM, RMI, EJB, web services, remoting, so many. Actually, Corba is Common Object Request Broken Architecture, invented by OMG Group in 1992, and it is used in more than 14 languages, including C++ and Java. And you also have DCOM, Distribute Component Object Model. So it is invented by Microsoft and it is used in VB-like languages. We have like RMI, Remote Method Invocation. It is used in J2EE, invented by Sun Microsystems. And you have EJB, Enterprise Java Beans. I hope you will learn all these. Huh? You have this in your concepts. In your full stack, you will use RMI and you will use EJB, right? You will learn about them. So Enterprise Java Beans. So, and you will see how to configure and create the services actually. Now, technically, so this web services is understandable to all technologies. It's not only for Java, .NET, Java, PHP, every technology can understand this web service. But actually, web service have three specifications. Web service have three specifications. Web service have three specifications: SOAP, REST, and JSON. Three specifications are there. Generally, in SOAP, what happens is, what happens is, in SOAP, the request from client sends an XML request, and server sends an XML response. Server will send a XML response. So the request and response in SOAP will be XML form. So, but in REST, it will send a simple query request. And the response from server will be in the form of XML or in the form of JSON. But request will be a simple query. So that means actually the web service specifications, we have three specifications. So we have three specifications. So this is all web service related specifications. You will learn in web service 3. So we have three web service specifications. We have SOAP, we have REST, and we have JSON. Generally in SOAP, what happens is, so the service consumer means nothing but service consumer means client. Service provider is server. So service consumer will send an XML request and the service provider will send an XML response. So request and response both will be in XML form. But in REST, representational state transfer, In rest, what happens is the service consumer will send a simple query request like this, a simple query request, and the service provider will send an XML response, and occasionally it will send JSON, XML, JSON response will be there. But these days, all the technologies are preferring JSON, JavaScript object notation. In JSON, request will be in the JSON form, and the response also will be in JSON form, JavaScript object notation form. So the request and response both are in JSON form. So this is generally 3 specifications of web service. Now, all the technologies are mostly preferring this JSON because JSON is more lightweight, it is portable, it can reach across various devices. So those XML days are now gone almost. So everywhere we are using this JSON request parsing techniques actually. Now the point is how we can handle this. Actually, many people who don't know about the distributed computing technologies and all, generally they ask one question like, sir, how to integrate Angular with Java, Angular with .NET? You will not integrate Angular with .NET or Java or any technology. So you use Angular in your Java to consume the services. You will not integrate anything. This is not integration, right? So you will use Angular as a client-side application to consume the API provided by your backend application. So you will learn how to build a complete backend application with APIs. In Java, you are going to do that. And through web services, you will do it. And generally, that will provide you some simple URLs like /get products. It is a get URL. /add product. So this is a post URL. So like this, they will provide the API URLs. So update product. It is a put URL. And delete product. It is a delete URL. Like this, they will provide you the API URLs. That means this API requests. As a client-side developer in Angular, you just need this URL. You don't need to even worry about what server-side technology they are using, which database we are using. We don't care. So consuming data requires the URL provided for that particular data. So only the service URL you need. You don't even need to understand from which database it is coming, which server-side technology it is coming. We just need the data, we can use the data. I will show you that. For example, see, suppose we are creating. So for example, we are a website. In this website, just roughly I am showing you. In a website, suppose some education website. In education website, so some science topic. So we want to tell something, some presentations on Mars, some explanation, some presentation on Mars. So some moon, like something we want to tell to the students in a education, college level, school level, education websites. Then they need some photos related to Mars, its environment and its content, moon, its environment and its content, and show to the students so that they can see how it looks like. Now the point is, from where we can get that? So from where you can get that? Who will provide you that information? So obviously online, even you Google. So suppose let's say I'm Google here. So I, in the images, Mars photos. So I search here Mars photos. You can see some photos I can see. From various people, these Mars related photos are available. But actually, do you know? So these are all photos provided by NASA. These all photos are provided by NASA. That means NASA provides all these photos because it gets its photos from its rovers. So NASA have rovers on the Mars. It can get updated photos, very latest photos. And do you know, it will provide that data. So some data to public, to public, so that public can educate others and tell about the extra planetary related topics. So that means about space and everything. So they provide some data public. NASA have its private data. It will provide some data public. So how they will provide data public? Will they provide access to their database? Will they give access to database and say that you see our data? No, it's not possible. It's very typical. Why? Because you cannot give access to the data directly to anybody so that he can disturb our data. Then what these people do? They create API, and through the API, they will provide that information. That is what actually you learn in your technologies in Java, how to create these APIs. You see here, NASA have its own APIs. So if you don't know, you see api.nasa.gov. This is the official NASA API's website. This is official NASA's API website, api.nasa.gov. So this they have provided for public. Public means general public don't know about this. So software developers know about these APIs and they can use the APIs and put them in their websites. You can see that. So there are browse APIs. When I go browse APIs, see so many APIs they provided for us. Asteroids related APIs, Earth related APIs, so exoplanet, so many. So you see so many. Mars rover photos, NASA image and video library. They provided video libraries. Suppose I want rover photos, Mars rover photos, and I click on this. You can see Mars rover photos, and they provided here the information about the data first. Information about the data is nothing but on their Mars rover, what are the cameras available, the camera names and their full forms, and camera from which rover, Curiosity, Opportunity, Spirit, these are the rovers. So rovers have some cameras. From which camera they have taken some photos. That entire information they given here. You see, they say that our data contains sol, which is an integer, camera, which is a string type, and page, which is an integer type, API key, which is a string type, and they given the API URL to you. They given this API URL to you. And you click this URL, you will see that the information is in the form of JSON. This is the data. This is official NASA data. Now, as a developer, I don't know which server-side technology they are using. I don't know which database they are using. It's not known to anybody. But we have the data provided by NASA. Now, as a developer, what is your responsibility as an Angular developer? So you have to understand the data coming from that particular API. And you need to create the user interface to present the data. We need to create the user interface for presenting the data. So that means, so this is the data coming. And you need to understand the data. So now you observe carefully, it's very complex. So you need to understand the data. Every time it will not be such complex. So do you know, if you clearly try to understand the data, observe it here, observe that data here. Actually, the Mars photos related data is present here. It is returning an object. You can see it is starting with this. That means it's returning an object. In that object, we have photos, and photos is an array. You can see that photos is an array. You can see photos is an array. photos is an array. In that, there is another object. That means in the photos array, we have an object. We have an object. In that object, we have a property called ID. And we have a property called sol. And we have a property called camera. But camera is again an object. Camera have its ID. Camera have its name. Camera have its rover ID. Rover ID. Camera have full name. All these details are present. And one more is having, so a lot of data is there. It is having another property, image source. It is having image source. And image source is coming from a specific image. It's a string. So a lot of data is there. You see, a lot of information is present. Now, if you can understand this data, what is coming, then you can present it. So Angular developer
Recording in progress.
and in XML very much. So because people, when we use web services, everything is in XML. But these days, XML almost gone. Now we are much using much depending on this JSON format. So data is presented in a JSON format, JavaScript object format, and that data we are consuming and using. Now in the backend, what technology, what services, that is completely unprofessional. So you should never ask how to integrate with Java, how to integrate with .NET. Then people think that you don't have a proper idea on services. You don't have a proper idea on service. If you don't have proper idea on service, what is a service, then you will have the questions like how to integrate with Java, how to integrate with .NET. That is why you are learning Angular with your Java, because your Java will teach you how to configure such APIs. And those APIs earlier people have to consume and present using JavaScript and jQuery. But now they have more better framework, that is Angular, more better library, that is React. Through that, they can present and they can handle it. So now to communicate with this API coming from server, So what we have to do is, so I will show you this example, how to consume the NASA APIs and present their information. I will show you that. Practically, we will see that. To do that, we need one more work here. So what we have to do? That means in order to get the data and in order to use the data coming from there, now you need to do one work, extra work. What we have to do is, we have an Angular application. So in the backend, there may be anything. So I will show you first example with some NASA API. I will show you this NASA API. So, and later I will show you one example of some other APIs, how they are used. Now this NASA API is already having some URL. That URL provides, this URL is defined for GET request. On the GET request, it is returning some data. Now what you have to do is, in Angular application, you have to create a service. So we have to create a service. This service have to communicate with API. If a service have to communicate with API, to communicate with API service, we need a HTTP client. Generally, JavaScript will communicate with the help of XML HTTP request object. JavaScript uses XML HTTP request object to communicate with the APIs. jQuery uses Ajax. So jQuery Ajax actually. jQuery uses Ajax methods. jQuery uses Ajax methods to communicate with the API. Actually, this XML HTTP request is also an Ajax method only. It is an Ajax method. And jQuery uses this Ajax method. And similarly, Angular uses HTTP client. By using this HTTP client, it can communicate with the API, get the data from the API, and send it to your application. It will send to the application. That is the basic approach it will work. So technically, that is how we need to handle. So client side, you may use any technology. You may use JavaScript, you may use jQuery, you may use Angular, anything. Currently, we are using Angular. So that means through Angular, we are communicating with the API, get the data and present it. And for that, Angular requires a service. And what is the service required by Angular to communicate with the API? And that is HTTP client service. So this HTTP client service can communicate with the API, get the data and return the data so that we can present the data. And one more required, Angular needs HTTP client and another library. It requires RxJS library. RxJS is nothing but asynchronous library. Why you need RxJS library? Because when you are making request to API and when you are fetching the information from the API, two techniques are synchronous technique and we have an asynchronous technique. In synchronous technique, what happens is until the response is finished from the API, until the API completely responds to you, until the response is finished, it will not allow to do any another work. So that means all other tasks are blocked. All other tasks are blocked when it is fetching information, communicating with API. But we don't want like that. We want our API to work in the background and allow the application to do the work in the foreground. So that whenever API is ready, gets the data and displays. So it should not block other tasks. For that, we need asynchronous approach. Asynchronous means it allows to do multiple tasks simultaneously at the same time. So in that case, so we need an asynchronous library while communicating with API. And RxJS is a JavaScript asynchronous library. It is not only Angular. All JavaScript based projects will use RxJS actually for asynchronous. RxJS is used everywhere where JavaScript is used. So RxJS is a JavaScript library that allows you to handle asynchronous requests so that it will not block the tasks. It will allow the tasks along with other tasks and perform the functionality. That simplifies the functionality. So this is required in Angular now. We need a HTTP client and we need RxJS. By using that, we can communicate with the APIs in the backend. We can get that and we can display. Now we will see this completely practically how to work with it. So we will take first example of NASA itself. That means we will use the official NASA API and we will get their information and present in our project. Then we will see how we can create our own services and interact with them, right? That we will see in our next session. So tomorrow we are going to implement this functionality. So from backend to front end, how we can get the data and interact with the data. Tomorrow we will see that example, okay? Tomorrow we will see how to consume APIs and present them by using this services concept, right?